Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, everybody. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. It is April 23rd, 2014. I am your host, Andrew Fisher, broadcasting live from the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, exposing the true and false nature of reality for what reality is and what reality isn't. And today we are scheduled to have UFO researcher Bill Birnes on the air. I don't think that's him in the call-in room right now. I think that's just one of my listeners now, but he will hopefully call in if for some reason he doesn't, like Fritz Springmeier didn't a couple weeks ago. He does want to come on my show, by the way, Springmeier does, but he seemed to somehow miss that, so try to get him on sometime. He missed it. Hopefully the same thing won't happen with Bill Birnes here. He apparently won't be calling through Skype because I don't have him on my Skype list. His wife, Nancy, who also works with him, did say that he is going to be on the show, so I do hope to see him. And going to be talking UFOs today and some stuff about extraterrestrials. I already know the first thing I want to ask him. It pertains to the show UFO Hunters on the History Channel. It was a great show. There were a few flaws here and there. What do you expect? It's the History Channel. They're going to try to put some brainwashing in. Not that it's Bill's fault. He was completely not in on that. He's a genuine, diehard UFO researcher. But that will be the subject for today, UFOs and a little bit of stuff extraterrestrial too mixed in, and maybe interdimensional extraterrestrial as well. But first we will start with the news, courtesy of Alex Jones and Company at InfoWars. Article 1, cops tie up 75-year-old grandmother in botched raid. He never said, "I'm sorry," never apologized. He said, you got to get someone to fix that door. Okay, police brutality. What do you expect? I can't wait till Eddie Craig of Rule of Law Radio launches dowoflaw.com. He does have most of it ready, but has to keep the security apparatus up to make sure that nobody sabotages that site. And that Dow of Law thing, the tyranny alert, will give us the ability to film the police if they ever do tyranny, like tying up 75-year-old women and raiding home, botched raid in this case. And tyranny alert will make it a lot harder for them to get away with that stuff. But next article, cops may have flaunted drone law to revenue generate at pot rally in Denver. Police did not file an incident report and would not say who the two men responsible for the flight were. Well, when it comes to pot rallies, you know the police are going to try to demonize anybody who tries to push for the legalization of marijuana. They do not want you to be able to smoke pot or use hemp for other purposes because they want you to have to get big pharma medicine that only makes you more sick, treats the symptoms, not the causes. And marijuana does have many medicinal properties that they don't want you to know about, so they make it illegal and demonize it. And this whole thing about flaunting a drone law, I'm really not so sure what this is all about. I don't have time to go into the article, but when it comes to drones, it's not about safety. It's about intimidating you, and in the case of Pakistan, a genocide. Boy, so many drone strikes in Pakistan. It's disgusting, and the Pakistani people know what's going on. They don't like it. All right, let's see this next article. Louisiana creates database of citizens who represent a risk to the state. Information hub would detect potential future criminals and allow government to intervene. Whatever happened to the right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure with a probable cause and oath or affirmation-supported warrant? They seem to think because the NSA does this, it's okay for a state to do that, and at risk to the state, a risk to the state, who could be a risk to the state? Maybe someone who wants to expose the tyranny of the people in government. Oh yeah, that should be in your face obvious, people. Government cares nothing about safety. They want to impose tyranny upon you. They don't care if you have something or nothing to hide. That's just a scare tactic used by governments to make you give up your liberty for security. And if you give up your liberty for security, then you're going to get microchipped. So wake up, people. Don't give up your liberty for security. All right, next article. Victory for breast milk mom against TSA tyranny. 2-year battle against government ends in victory for mother who was locked in glass cage because she breastfed her baby at the TSA. I seem to recall something about this, but TSA, again, it's not about safety. And they relegated you to commerce by labeling you a passenger on your airline ticket. And you can't win a TSA lawsuit because your ticket refers to you as a passenger And passenger is legally defined as a commercial term, so by putting yourself in commerce, you're giving the government the authority to regulate you, which makes it okay for them to violate your right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure without a warrant, and they don't want you to know that they've done that to you. Of course, one could make the argument that you're paying for the service, and since you're paying for the service, that gives you the right to say, I don't want to be searched, I have the right to refuse this search. Well, the government would certainly say otherwise on that one. But next article, Bunkerville was not the Bureau of Land Management's first rustlers roundup. Cliven Bundy and his family were hardly the first Nevada ranchers to confront federally licensed cattle rustlers. Well, it's government land, so Bundy must give it up. Oh, no. The people created the government. Therefore, the people have the right to be on government land. The people in government are your servants, and the only reason government was created to exert by any force to protect the rights and property of every single person who is under the auspices of that government. We never gave the government the ability to intervene and interrupt us in our lives in our private capacities. Only when you cause or intend to cause harm to another person or property through negligence or deliberate intent does the government have the authority to intervene and charge you with some sort of a crime. All right, next article. Lavrov, Russia will respond if eastern Ukraine is attacked. Cites example of South Ossetia and war between Georgia and Russia. Well, that war between Georgia and Russia, that was back in 2008, that was a complete and total lie. It was not like what we were told it was all about. And Dick Cheney was in on that whole plot as well. He, just like Dick Cheney was in on 9/11, he knew the plane was coming. Just ask Norman Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation at the time. All right, moving on with this. In regards to Russia responding if eastern Ukraine is attacked, Putin, he's an arrogant jerk. And David Icke did refer to him as a Archon Russian president. Make of that whatever you will. But he is acting like a dictator here, and you could certainly imagine that. I could certainly imagine that he might. I want more of Ukraine. Give me more Ukraine. I want to expand the Russian Empire. And you know, the United States, being the Roman Empire of the modern era, who invades other countries more than any other country on planet Earth. That is a fact, people. We invade other countries more than any other country on planet Earth. The United States of America does. If they, of there's a war going on, you know, the U.S. might intervene. All right, two more articles. Hopefully, before I get Bill on, I don't know if he's called in. I hope he has, but if he hasn't, you know, I'm going to be really going to be sending a couple messages to some people. But all right, hopefully I won't have to worry about that. I'll check to see if he's on in a moment. But two more articles here. New York Homeland Security encourages businesses to snitch on preppers as terrorists. Purchase of MREs, flashlights, and ammunition is a suspicious activity. Okay, does this imply that maybe they know that some disaster is going to happen, like a financial collapse, and that's why they are getting desperate about asking people to snitch on preppers? You know, a lot of bankers have committed suicide recently. Was it suicide or murder? We don't know. But does it lead you to think that maybe some economic collapse is coming and they can't stand to see what's going to happen, don't want to know what's going to happen, so they kill themselves? Or are they being murdered because they're going to blow the whistle on that? Who knows? But it doesn't surprise anybody. Shouldn't surprise you that they would ask people to snitch on preppers. Everything is terrorist activity. Everything. Terrorists. The only terrorists are the tyrants in government and the New World Order forces who control them. All right, moving on. One last article. Agenda 21. The Bureau of Land Management land grabbing endgame. Why is the federal government so obsessed with grabbing more land? Well, maybe because the federal government of the United States is bought and paid for by the same mega banks, mega corporations, and secret society consortium that controls all the national governments on planet Earth, and they're concocting evil plans for global totalitarian government, so they would want to grab more land. Well, that might explain a lot now, doesn't it? Well, I'm about to find out if Bill is on. I hope he is. Let's see who this could be. Hello, area code 215. Who is this?
Hi, this is Bill.
Bill, how you doing? Oh, duh. You actually live not that far from me. You live in the Solebury area. I live in Lower Moreland. I was shocked to see a 215 area code, but then I realized, oh, you don't live that far from me. Well, how about that? How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to see you call in. Had a couple of instances in the past where my guest didn't call in, but I'm not going to elaborate on that. I knew you wouldn't do that. Your wife said it's confirmed.
Right. Yeah, Nancy said it was confirmed. So what I did, and in fact, she actually reminded me in a very emphatic way because she saw me out there chopping wood, as you know. in the rural burbs of Philly. All we do is split wood all year long for the winter.
Right. It's great she was able to convince you about that and talk to you, and remind you to come on. And one thing I first want to start off with, Bill, there's something really hanging over my head, and I got to address this right off the bat. They show UFO Hunters on the History Channel. I could have sworn I once heard them say new episodes of UFO Hunters going to air, and then that new episode season did not air. And I seem to recall you saying something about the show being unexpectedly canceled. Are you willing to suspect that the reason the show was canceled was because it was revealing too much information, and the powers that be who worked on the History Channel decided to cancel the show without telling you why?
It wasn't the History Channel. It was other powers that be, because we were told flat out by someone who identified himself to me. Now, there's no ID, no badge, no identifying credentials, but who identified himself to me as a non-official cover officer for the CIA, who said flat out, we stepped on phenomenally big toes on the Area 51 episode in season 2, and he said if that weren't bad enough, then you guys really got a lot of people mad at you when you went to Dulce and showed those photographs of the embryo of the cow fetus with the human head and human hand on the show. So he said you really got a lot of people mad, and we know that we got people incensed because that show aired in March 2009, and a few months after the show aired, a bunch of senators, one of them was Mary Landrieu from Louisiana, a bunch of senators, Grassley was another one, a bunch of them came forward and proposed a bill in the United States Senate to criminalize, and George Bush made it clear in 2006, to criminalize the hybridization, the DNA interbreeding of humans and animals.
Okay. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, and so that's what happened. So when this guy said, the good news is you really broke a great story. The bad news is that was the last story you're going to break.
Well, what do you expect? That's what happens with shows that reveal too much. Case in point, Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy behind Project Camelot. They had a TV series that was supposed to air on True TV, and it was about Mars. And, the first episode did air. It was about Mars, but after that episode, the show got canceled. Gee, I wonder why. And that episode, it was supposed to actually air before the election, but it aired after the election unexpectedly. And one of the things they discussed in the episode was how Obama took part in a secret space program to Mars. And if you want to know about that, tune into my show next week, folks, because I have Andrew Bashago on. He was in that space program with Obama to Mars, but that's for next week. For this week, Bill, since I realized you live just really close to me, you live in Bucks County, a lot of UFO activity there, and I have been at some protests at the Horsham Airfield to protest the drones, because that's being turned into a drone base, the Horsham Air Force Base, and there seems to be some evidence I've heard from sources that one source of so many UFOs in Bucks County has to do with the Horsham Air Base. Would you be willing to say, yeah, that's true, and if there are any other UFO locations that could be the source of the Bucks County UFOs, can you tell us about them?
Well, from the interviews we did and the scientific assessment of the scenes of various UFO encounters in Bucks County, in Levittown, for example, what we discovered was it was more than just a UFO sighting. And the person who told us the story of her particular encounter, which is a mind-blowing story, by the way, the person who told us that story, it clearly was not a drone, because she described a light that had a shape. So it wasn't a drone. It was drones are stealthy. So this was a light that had a shape, and this was in Levittown in Bucks County, and it hovered over her property. And it was one of many sightings, by the way. There was a whole flap in late 2008, early 2009. It flew over her property, and it focused a light, just like a light that expanded as it reached the ground. As it was slowly crossing her property, slowly traversing her property at a very low altitude, maybe hundreds of feet. And it was scanning for something. Now, we've seen that light before, once on a video taken in Stephenville, Texas, and another from a description also in Stephenville, Texas, and the person actually described and then sketched out the craft that was flashing that light. It scanned the ground, and it hit this one bush right by the person's house. Now, she was standing outside. She let the dog out, right? So she was standing outside, and she sees this craft, and she's like transfixed by it. So she was so transfixed by it that she lost all track of time or she had missing time. I can't differentiate between the two in this particular incident. But she lost track of time completely. What she thought was a few minutes turned out to be hours. The day before, in that one bush, the day before, she saw a robin's nest with a baby robin in it. Oh, is that cute? I've got a robin's nest. Isn't that wonderful? This is very early spring. When the UFO passed over, when the light, let's be precise, when the light passed over that was shining some kind of a beam on the property and scanned the beam over the bush, the next morning she went out. Where that beam had hit the bush, that bush was dead. Dead from age. It had aged and dried out. And on the ground by the bush was an old, dried out, dead robin. So MUFON came out, Pensy MUFON. They came out, Joan Ventry, Bob Gardner came out, and they did a forensic gathering of evidence at the crime scene, and they found out that now they came out weeks later, so there had been rain between the incident and when they came out to the person's house. When that happened, they did find chemicals, compounds, substances on the leaves that were not supposed to be there. They were not, and they took control samples, and they were not supposed to be in this area. So they weren't unknown. It was like a magnesium was normal chemicals, but they were not supposed to be in the area. They are not natural to that kind of a plant in this area. And so that to me tells me that whatever else might have been going around, that wasn't a drone.
Right, but do you think maybe the Horsham Air Force Base could be the place where some of the UFOs in Bucks County are headquartered at?
I think that if UFOs are surveilling the area, then they certainly might be surveilling the Horsham Air Force Base. Might be. But from the descriptions that we had and from reports from Philly International, the airport, if the military is going, first of all, one of the protocols, and this would be astounding if they violated this protocol, one of the protocols about drones, and this is why the Horsham Air Force Base is particularly in a sensitive spot, is that the Horsham Air Force Base is under the civilian surveillance by the whole Philadelphia area air traffic control, right? Philadelphia Center. And for a drone to be flying in this area, it would be picked up on radar. And it would be, and Philly, as you know, from flying out of Philly back, you know how crowded this area is. I mean, it's a very the skies are very crowded in this area. From Philly all the way out to New York, it's a very crowded area. A drone flying through this area, and there have been drones flying out on Long Island. That was the downing of TWA Flight 800. The sub that fired the missile was aiming at a drone when the 747 flew through. But for the Air Force to be flying drones over this very civilian area, this heavily trafficked area, they would be notifying the air traffic control for the Philadelphia Center, for this whole central area. And if there was no notification, then because this is a collision alert, you've got a drone, you've got commercial aircraft, accidents are very easy to happen if you've got crowded skies. And if air traffic control doesn't know you've got Air Force drones flying through the area, then that's a prescription for disaster. So unless the FAA knew there were drones in the area, then I would say no.
Okay. I guess I might as well move on to one of the things you said that they really didn't like, the whole thing about Area 51. And now, one key thing you said on UFO Hunters is evidence is suggesting that they're trying to move the stuff at Area 51 to other locations because people are catching on to what Area 51 is all about. And just as a side note, I want to point out that Andrew Bartzis, Akashic Records reader and galactic historian, who I make reference to a lot on my show because he's a great source because of his Akashic skills, he did talk about Area 51 in his 20-part interview on the Creating 5D YouTube channel, but he only briefly talked about extraterrestrial and UFO stuff at Area 51. He spent more time talking about how the base is used for government time travel technology. That's something I'll definitely try to talk about with Andrew Bashago on my show next week. But in regards to Area 51, what are some key things you'd like the public to know about Area 51? And most importantly, are they moving the base to other locations? And if so, where?
Well, first of all, the anything truly exotic and otherworldly or unconventional is already gone from Area 51. It's at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. So that's first of all. And the main reason for that is that Area 51 has become really a public center of conversation, a public center of discussion. Why? Because of Bob Lazar and the Bob Lazar story going public, George Knapp carrying the Bob Lazar story on KLAS TV. So that's become a real center of conversation, as I said. So, and it's very easily accessible visually from places like Tikaboo Peak. Yes, you've got to climb, and it's a tough climb. It's like a 15-degree, 18-degree incline, and that's not small stuff, right? And it's mainly gravel trying to get up there. So if you could imagine crawling on your hands and knees on gravel up a 15, 18-degree incline, you could see how rough that is. And if you're going to take a camera up, you're carrying a couple of 100 pounds, which we did, a couple of 100 pounds of gear up that incline. And you've got to do it at night because you want the sun at your back when it rises so that you get a clear view of the base in full sunlight as the sun comes up over Tikaboo Peak, which we did. And that's what got a lot of the guards. It's not the guards. The guards, the Delta Force guys and the camo dudes, basically the contractors, the sentries at the base, they thought it was a riot. They were on the floor, right? Because they knew we were there. The whole area around 51 is ringed with motion sensors. So somebody car's walking up to the base, they know. It's ringed with microphones so they can hear you talking. So they know everything about what you're doing. So, and they really don't care, we didn't go on the base, but when we climbed up Tikaboo Peak and we aired that big hangar, that revealed a lot of secrets. What was the secret? Here's the secret. It's not a UFO, although we did capture a UFO on film over the base. So they're still flying these reverse-engineered craft, as Bob Lazar pointed out. But they've been developing a new craft from the SR-71 to the SR-72. Far more advanced craft, can fly higher, can fly faster, and they have a huge hangar, which we captured on video. That freaked them out because, you realize we put it up on TV and you might as well be telling the Chinese and the Russians what we're doing. But our theory behind it was, look, it's available from Google Earth. And if you don't think that the Russian Secret Service and the Chinese military and the GRU, for the Soviet Union Military Intelligence, are constantly monitoring that base, well, then you're being naive. Of course they are, just like we monitor the Russian base, Kapustin Yar. So we all do. And so they knew it was there, but we put it up on TV, which really fueled a lot of... and then we captured that craft. That was clearly not a conventional aircraft. That was not a meteorite, not a falling star, not anything that could be accounted for. Because of the way it was performing, we captured that on camera and we aired that film. So yeah, we got in a lot of trouble for that. So they may still have reverse-engineered anomalous craft at Area 51, but the main research center has gone over to Dugway, which we call Area 52.
Okay, a couple of things about Area 51 and the conspiracy theory with Jesse Ventura episode. he found out that if you try to file on Area 51, Ventura found out from some guy who lived in Rachel, Nevada, the nearby town, that if you try to file a Freedom of Information Act to find out who the installation commander it is at Area 51, because it says no access to this base without permission from the installation commander, the Freedom of Information Act will come back blank. And when he tried to talk to the state representative in charge of that area, the meeting was unexpectedly canceled for no reason. So all the more confirmation that Area 51 is treated like it's above the law. But moving on from Area 51, Bill, I hate to burst your bubble, but I need to sort of have a slight of a debate with you here, because you mentioned Bob Lazar. I do think he's sincere, and I think his work is significant because it deals with Zeta Reticuli Greys, and ET contactee Alex Collier said that the Zeta Reticuli Greys take orders from malevolent Orion Greys, who take their orders from the Draco Reptilians. That's the Malevolent Alien Alliance, and if you believe that, then you believe Bob's work is very significant. However, there are people scratching their heads right now, because I had UFO researcher Stanton Friedman on my show, and he believes that Bob Lazar is a bright man, but he also said, but Bob is not telling the truth. He said that Bob could not have been at some of the places that he went to, and if anybody wants to listen to this, just type Stanton Friedman, Bob Lazar on YouTube, and you'll find like a 5-minute video where he gives his evidence. And he also talked on my show about element 115. He said the half-life of that element is too short. There's no way the aliens could do anything, and just for that, he's opened up a can of worms into why some people think Bob Lazar is a fraud. So, Bill, can you debunk Stanton Friedman and confirm that Bob Lazar is genuine?
Well, the person who basically found out that Bob Lazar was genuine wasn't myself, wasn't I. It was George Knapp on Coast to Coast. Here's what happened. George Knapp went out with Bob Lazar and this person, Gene Huff, to see this craft when Bob Lazar knew the craft would be flying. So I saw the video that John Lear had, and it was John Lear, Gene Huff, and George Knapp. So that's first of all. So Lazar knew when they'd be flying that anomalous craft. But that's not all. One of the things that George Knapp did after Lazar told him the story, Lazar's name had been erased from all the public records. So if you went to Area 51 to find out, did Bob Lazar work there, you would find out that there was no Bob Lazar. So Stan's right about that. However, what George did was, Lazar also said he worked at Alamogordo, worked at Sandia. He worked at these New Mexico research centers, and I think it's White Sands. What George did was he went to them, and he went for all the employee records. And again, Stan's right. Bob Lazar's name never turned up. So there was no Bob Lazar. But here's what George Knapp did. He found a phone book from, I think it was White Sands. He found a phone book. And in the phone book was Bob Lazar's name and his office number, his contact in the office. So Bob Lazar existed in a phone book, not in the employee records, but in a phone book. Knapp also found out that there were articles about what was going on at White Sands, and again, Bob Lazar's name turned up. So George Knapp did some, again, investigative journalism and was able to place Bob Lazar exactly where Bob Lazar said he was. And, of course, I saw the videos with Bob Lazar outside Area 51 with Gene Huff, John Lear, and George Knapp. So, no, Bob Lazar was real. He knew exactly what was going on at Area 51 in the desert. They actually filmed anomalous craft. And so in terms of Bob Lazar's, the credibility of Bob Lazar, yes, Stan's right, you can't find him in any records, but George Knapp did find him in the phone book at White Sands. So that really, so they erased everything, but they didn't erase the phone book. And it was an old phone book, which meant this was before anything happened that would cause the government to erase his identity. And again, before he came to Area 51, and before any of this UFO revelation started at Area 51. So that's the story of Bob Lazar.
Yeah, and by the way, when I had ancient astronaut theorist Jason Martell on my show, he told me that Stanton Friedman had a conflict of interest with Bob Lazar. He didn't elaborate on that, but I'm guessing it has something to do with the element 115. I did actually do the math, by the way, on one episode of, I think it was UFO Hunters, One guy explained the distance that you can travel with element 115 technology in a fraction of a second. After writing a few proportions, I determined that you can travel from Earth to Zeta Reticuli in a little over 7 hours utilizing the element 115 space-time warping technology. But just to because of what Stan Freeman said about the half-life of element 115 being too short to be able to do anything with it, in the case, what Bob Lazar says, you bombard it with particles, which makes it element 116, that's the number of protons, and then it decays, and that bends and warps space-time when it decays from 116 to 115. But Stan said the half-life is too short. So can you debunk Stan Freeman's claim that the half-life is too short to do anything?
Stan's a nuclear physicist, and I'm not. The person who told me, and I know the episode, it was the Area 51 episode, and it was my interview with John Lear. The person who explained that to me, and he explained two things. He explained how element 115 was enhanced to element 116, which lasted a fraction of a second, and as it decayed in that fraction of a second, it didn't remain in the craft. As it decayed, it didn't travel through space. It pulled space around it. That was John Lear's explanation, not mine, John Lear's explanation. And in pulling space around it, the craft literally slipped through the space-time continuum. So that debate would be really between Stan and John Lear. But the other thing John Lear explained, and again, you can see if this theory works. They brought Bob, this is Bob Lazar's story, they brought Bob Lazar to this room when they were trying to explain what the propulsion system is they were trying to reverse engineer. And through this window, Lazar was watching a candle flame. Candle was burning. And supposedly they bombarded the candle with element 115, a beam of element 115. And to Bob Lazar, on the outside of that chamber, he saw the candle stop flickering. And Lazar remarked to the person who was showing him this, "Wow, you basically stopped the candle." And I'm going to lay out my theory here. This is not for the purpose of debunking; it's to reveal a story and how certain things link together. So they explained to Bob, "No, we didn't. The candle is still burning." And he says, "Well, how can that happen?" And he said, "Because time in that room was stopped." In other words, what you're looking at from the outside of that time envelope was something that looks like the candle is frozen, but it's not. It's still burning, but time itself has stopped, and so therefore the candle looks like it's frozen. Now, in the other episodes we did, and this is all based on interviews. Again, I'm not a nuclear physicist. This is anecdotal information from people that we spoke to during the course of the show. So in the other episodes, in almost every other close encounter of a person seeing either a huge triangle or whatever, a flying object that couldn't be identified, but the person seeing that, and I'm thinking especially of the Liberty Township police officer in Liberty Township, Ohio. He was watching this craft, and as the craft flew over his police unit, suddenly his radio went dead. His car engine stopped. Now, this to me is the important thing. His car engine stopped dead. All the electrical systems in his car went out. Well, as you know, if you have any knowledge about how police units work, there is a carrier signal that's going back and forth between a unit and dispatch. And if that unit drops off the air for any reason, that's an alert to dispatch that something's wrong. So the dispatcher, I think her first name was Patty, but I'm not sure, is trying to reach this police unit and can't do it. He's off the air. Now, the officer sees that object pass overhead and go into the distance. Suddenly his radio comes back to life, and his engine starts. How many engines and how many electrical devices have you seen in your life that suddenly come to life if the power's been shut off, right? And then the cause of the power being shut off reverses itself like a power outage in Bucks County, right? We think of Hurricane Sandy, right? Think of all the power that went out. Think of just this past fall, last year, all the power went out in this area, right? When the power comes back on, you've got to turn your devices back on. Okay, the power may come back on. You may see one of the lights on your board, but it's not as though the television starts playing. I mean, you have to turn your devices back on. Well, in this particular case, engines started up. Gasoline engines do not start up automatically if suddenly the electrical power to bring a charge to that engine comes back. Okay, they don't do that. You've got to restart the engine because it's cut out. His engine started up. In other cases, people have a completely, just like this case in Bucks County, people have a completely warped sense of time. I thought it was only 2 minutes. Wait a minute, it was an hour? What happened? My theory, and it's only my theory is that time itself is suspended by whatever field is being generated by the object. That's why you have, even in non-alien abduction cases, you have this sense of missing time, because time itself has been stopped. So you're not aware of the passage of time once you're inside that envelope. So if that helps explain what Bob Lazar saw in that room with that candle, that would be my theory. And again, this is a theory that is completely not from a nuclear physicist.
Well, many metaphysics and consciousness experts assert that space and time are illusions, and some ET researchers even say like really high-level density ETs could, in theory, exploit the fact that space and time are illusions and do quantum entanglement at a macroscopic scale and teleport their extremely highly light bodies across the universe. So, I mean, if you understand that space and time are illusions, then traveling through timelines in space becomes a lot more easier, one could argue. But one thing I want to talk about in regards to time and also doing things on a macroscopic scale, Roswell. If anybody wants to hear about what did actually happen at Roswell based on what we know, you can listen to the whole part of that interview with Stan Friedman where we talked about that. But one thing about Roswell that you talked about, I did see a presentation that you and someone else did on the UFO TV Studios YouTube channel where I think this was just a theory, or maybe if you can say the evidence shows this, then please do, where the idea was that gray extraterrestrials from the future transported back in time into our present time in order to do the Heisenberg uncertainty principle on a macroscopic scale so they could alter this timeline to change it in a way that would affect the future that they were coming from in a way that suited their agenda. Do you have any evidence to back up this? And if I'm confused about something, then please tell me. But I do remember hearing this, that's what Roswell was about, traveling back in time to change the timeline.
Well, that wasn't something that I said, so it might have been somebody else. In terms of Roswell, I basically staunchly agree with Stan. We have interviewed people who literally, in addition to the witnesses who turn up and one of the people you should talk to is Tom Carey and or Don Schmidt, or both of them, among the many, many people who talk about what happened at Roswell in July 1947 were the people who were eyewitnesses to the crash site. For example, people from the Roswell Fire Department. Inez Wilcox, whose husband George Wilcox went out to the crash site. When the crash happened, what people thought from the whole public safety area in Roswell, this is before Jesse Marcel got to the site, because it was George Wilcox who called the base at Walker Field, the 509th. It was actually the sheriff who called them, because Brazo brought in a box of debris from the crash site that Sheriff Wilcox, George Wilcox, put in a jail cell for safekeeping. Then he called the base, and that's when the base came out they secured the debris that was in the jail, spoke to Brazel, went out to the site, and that began the cleanup of the site. Now, among the eyewitnesses, and here's what we did on UFO Hunters, and this is where it was different from the other UFO shows. You've mentioned a lot of other UFO shows, right? The Jesse Ventura show, some other shows. Those shows started from the premise of showing that something happened at Roswell that was real, and it was something anomalous. What we did on UFO Hunters was just the opposite. We didn't reason forward based on the evidence. We reasoned backwards based on the evidence. And here's why that reinforces the Roswell story more than reasoning forward. You're reasoning forward, you are asserting something happened at Roswell, okay? And you're arguing again, oh, look at what this witness said, look at what that witness said, look at what this person said, right? I could go on because you've got 30, 40 witnesses, including Brazel, the radio station guy, Frankie Rowe, the fire guy, Alpha Boyd's father, who was a maintenance man at the base. Go on, right? We interviewed Earl Fulford, who was a staff sergeant at the base, who was at the debris field collecting debris from the crash site. Interviewed him. Art Campbell at the Plains of San Augustine. You can do all that, and you will not change one mind of a skeptic or a debunker, okay? You won't do that. What we did, and this is where I agree with Stan, what we did was we went to all the debunker arguments. So you take the Phil Klass argument, you take the Air Force argument, the Project Mogul argument, the weather balloon argument, the Annie Jacobson Horton Brothers flying wing, take all those arguments. The Japanese balloon bomb argument was another one, the Fugus, the Japanese balloon bombs, that the Japanese during the war floated over the Pacific. They were laced with, they contained explosives, and they were laced with anthrax, I think. And they actually caused damage in the American Northwest. We at first thought that might have been a balloon bomb that landed in Roswell. Well, all that is fine. Those are all the what we did was we went after each debunker argument. This is where Stan's arguments came in. We went after each debunker argument, and what we did was we tested that argument against reality. So the weather balloon argument, right? Jesse Marcel had been, and this is, again, there's no UFO here. It's just, this was a weather balloon. That was the first story, because that's what General Roger Ramey put right behind Major Marcel and asked him to pose with that weather balloon and say, oops, I made a big mistake. It's not a UFO. It's not a craft from somewhere off this planet. It's a weather balloon. Stupid me. Okay. So we took that argument. What's a weather balloon made of? And where was Jesse Marcel weeks before that Roswell incident? Well, a weather balloon is made of neoprene rubber. Has neoprene rubber been around for a while? Yeah. We used it all through World War II. The 509th at Walker Field was a strategic air base, right? That's where the nuclear weapon pilots were changed and went to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So you don't think they would know what a weather balloon was at a highly classified, top-secret nuclear Army Air Force base? Of course they would. Where was the weather balloon factory with respect to the base? Did they bring these from some exotic location across country? No. The weather balloon factory was right across the street from the base. They knew exactly what was going on there. They were building weather balloons and launching weather balloons made of neoprene rubber. Jesse Marcel would have recognized neoprene rubber. It was used throughout the war. Okay, so much for the weather balloon. We've just debunked that argument. Okay, next argument. It was a mogul balloon. Of course they wouldn't have known what's happening because nobody knew what a mogul balloon was in 1947. What was a mogul balloon in 1947? Was it a huge balloon made of this exotic material, made of mylar? No. A Project Mogul balloon to sniff the air and listen for sounds of nuclear explosions in the atmosphere, that was made of a string of weather balloons. So the exact same technology to get this test material aloft, the surveillance material aloft, was simply a string of weather balloons. Was it Mylar? No. That was 1949, 1950. This was 1947. They were using neoprene rubber. So much for the Project Mogul story. Oh, it was really a Horton Brothers flying wing. Nobody knew what that was. Well, the Horton Brothers flying wing was actually on television. Oh, actually, no, in the motion pictures. There was a 1938 movie written by H.G. Wells called Things to Come. What did they fly in that movie? Flying wings. Would the Air Force have known what a flying wing was? Sure, because Jack Northrop, right, Northrop Aviation, Jack Northrop developed the first bomber that was a flying wing. We had that in the late 1930s. So, in other words, we knew exactly what a flying wing was. Well, let's say they didn't know at the base and it was an exotic material. What was the Horton Brothers flying wing made of? Wood. How exotic is that? It was propelled by a strange thing. No, the Horton Brothers flying wing was propelled by jet engines. Did we know what a jet engine was? Sure, because in 1947, we were launching V-2 rockets in New Mexico, so we knew what a rocket engine was. We had rockets. And we knew what a jet engine was because at the end of World War II, in 1945, there were jet-powered Messerschmitts that were trying to intercept our squadrons. The Red Tail Squadron, the Tuskegee Airmen, were fighting against jet aircraft, German jet aircraft. So there was nothing, absolutely nothing, exotic or anomalous about the Horton Brothers flying wing. So I could go on and on. What we did was we went after every single explanation that the government put up and debunked it. And what was our principle of argument? It was this. It came from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote in Sherlock Holmes stories, The Four Signals, and other stories, other novels that were published in the 19th century, that you go after every argument in trying to investigate a case, and you investigate that particular argument until you can dispose of that argument. Whatever is left, that's probably the truth. Quote, Sherlock Holmes. And that's how we conducted all the episodes over 3 seasons of UFO Hunters. And that's why no other show, including Jesse Ventura's show, has ever been able to duplicate what we did.
Right. And although I just want to point out, Stan Friedman did once say that he was not very happy about the way the Roswell episode of UFO Hunters was laid out. He didn't really elaborate on that, but he said he did voice his displeasure. Do you know exactly what he's referring to? Was he just referring? He thought the episode, the way you guys did it, could have been better, or just to speak in your defense, do you know what he meant by that?
No, he was on the episode, by the way. So he was there, and the arguments about the mogul balloon and the weather balloon, absolutely. It's, I think, a matter of how you, let's say there are 3 things that you're dealing with, okay? The one thing you're dealing with is television itself. The very nature of television is a distortion of reality. So, I mean, unless you had a video camera at Roswell in 1947 and captured the entire event on film or on videotape as it unfolded, which I wonder if somebody did do, by the way, you're going to get a distortion of reality. You're dealing with for all the video you shoot, you may shoot 4 hours, 5 hours of video, 6 hours of video, even more, to get to something like 49 to 51 minutes of actual airtime. So you've got people who were not in the UFO field who were making edits based on the artistic presentation of what will finally be on the air. The episode is broken into 5 acts. And that artificial breaking, because you're dealing with commercials, that artificial breaking also creates a sense of artificialness, of artificiality, is the right word, in the presentation. And third is you are looking through the lens of a camera. And the lens of a camera will distort reality so as to make it more real, if that makes any sense to you. It's really art in a closed field. So you've got 2 frames you're dealing with. One is the frame of the camera that's videotaping the event, the interviews, the interactions, and the second is the frame of the monitor of the television set you're looking through. all of that will distort your perception of what should be on the air. So Stan's absolutely right. I mean, if he has personal issues with how the episode was broadcast, then it's a question of where did those perceptions, where did the episode not meet Stan's expectations? Was it in the actual filming? Was it in the writing? I mean, I wrote most of that episode. Was it in the writing or the filming? Was it in the editing, in post-production? And was it the way the network wanted the episode changed when they saw the next to final version, and the network would give notes? So the way that would work would be, we would do a rough cut of the episode, okay, because we're whittling all this video down to something like 50-ish minutes of airtime. The network would see it. The network executive producer would write notes. First, it would go to the producer of the exec producer of the television of the production company, whose name was John Walls. He would give his notes. Then they'd recut the episode. Then it would go to the network, and the network would give us notes. We'd have to recut the episode to fit the network, and then it would go into its final form. That's how it worked. Anywhere along the line, there could be something in the editing that would make someone unhappy with the episode.
Okay, that's understandable. Speaking of episodes, have you by any chance watched the new series of UFOs on the History Channel called Hangar One? I've seen every episode, and I think they do a pretty good job of exposing important UFO information, but there are a few brainwashing things here and there, like making it seem the U.S. government is on our side when it comes to invading other countries. They did talk about that, like presented terrorism in a way that's a brainwashing tactic, among other things. But as far as UFO and alien stuff, I don't think it was that bad. Have you watched that show? And if
I haven't seen it. A book that I wrote is coming out next month. It's actually on sale now at Amazon. It's called Hearts of Darkness. And it's really about mass shootings and mass murder and schoolyard shootings and workplace shootings, this whole epidemic that we're looking at. One of the stories we cover, and I'm sure nobody has covered this on the air, is that our modern brain conditioning, what we're doing now, goes all the way back to things that were happening in the concentration camps during World War II. There were a lot of Nazi scientists working on conditioning. These were experiments on concentration camp prisoners. They were brutal, cruel, vicious experiments on human beings who were going to be killed and were therefore expendable, but they were like torture. And these were experiments in all kinds of resistance techniques. Well, our intelligence services kept those records from Josef Mengele and the concentration camp doctors. And we slowly began to adapt these for our own purposes. All the way back from the very end of World War II, the United States Navy was working on all kinds of conditioning experiments. Back to World War II. One of those people who worked for the Navy was a professor at Harvard, who wound up at Harvard, called Harry Murray. Harry Murray was working on, he sought volunteers, but he was working on this level of conditioning, banging on a person's psychological resistancy to test that resiliency. One of the very young people who was this brilliant student at Harvard in the 1950s was a young man who was already an at-risk person because of family issues. His name was Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski is the Unabomber, and who eluded the FBI for 13 years. Ted Kaczynski, we believe, was conditioned by this person, Harry Murray. At the end of his criminal career, Kaczynski wrote this manifesto, this rage against the machine, this rage against society. The person who read that manifesto was a person in Norway called Anders Breivik. Anders Breivik became a mass murderer and killed all these teenagers on this island out of Norway, and set these bombs off in Oslo that killed people. And he was plagiarizing Ted Kaczynski's manifesto. Anders Breivik's manifesto studied very carefully by a young autistic. He wasn't a teenager. He was a young man, a 20-year-old Adam Lanza, who quoted from that manifesto when he announced to people he was going to start killing, and he was the Sandy Hook Newtown shooter. Just a few weeks ago at Fort Hood, specialist Ivan Lopez went on a murder rampage, and who did he quote? Adam Lanza. So you could see how this conditioning, and in the 1950s, the CIA was sponsoring conditioning experiments, invasive experiments into the minds of test subjects in Canada by this person called Ewan Cameron and this other psychiatrist, this neuropsychiatrist by the name of Wilder Penfield. Wilder Penfield's research turns up in a book which was the basis of this thing called transcendental psychology. You know, you're finding your parent, your child, yourself. And that became the book, I'm Okay, You're Okay. And the other book, The Games People Play, I think it was the Engelbert Humperdinck song, or Tom Jones. So look at how the influence of Joseph Mengele in the 1940s actually affected us just a few weeks ago. That's the conditioning that's going on. So that's the real serious stuff. That's the stuff that's been under the radar for decades, for 70 years. That's the stuff that we've been doing.
Well, keep up the good work on that, but I want to talk a little bit about the subject of military UFOs here, because a little bit of a debate I want to bring up here. It has been said that UFOs are owned by the military. Some have and some do not have extraterrestrial connections. Some UFOs come from other planets, some from other dimensions, some from other timelines. It's really a percentage factor. But here's the thing. When I had ET contactee George Kavaslis on my show, he said that the majority of UFOs that we see are actually of a malevolent nature because they belong to the military-industrial complex. We didn't really get into what percentage of those have extraterrestrial connections, those military-industrial complex UFOs. When I had Stanton Freeman on my show, he said, well, I don't deny that there's a government extraterrestrial UFO cover-up, but I don't really think the military is the one that controls the UFOs. And then his argument was, don't you think they would have used the UFOs in the wars, which they didn't do? Now, my take on that is, well, Stan is failing to consider the idea that every single national government on planet Earth is controlled by malevolent extraterrestrials. Therefore, it is not in their best interest to use UFOs in wars at a public level, maybe like with a few exceptions like the Foo Fighters in Nazi Germany. But would you agree with the notion that the majority of UFOs, or disagree with the notion maybe that the majority of UFOs are military-industrial complex connected?
One of our guests on the show, one of our fabulous guests on the show, was the great Bill Scott from Aviation Week in Space Technology. He was the Rocky Mountain Bureau Chief. All the way back in the 1980s, and this is where he ran afoul of Phil Klass, who was working for Aviation Week in Space Technology, but he was also an NOC for the CIA. And Bill Scott, his opinion was that there are craft that we have, call them neutral buoyancy craft for argument's sake, that there are craft that we have that have the ability to project images of themselves into different spaces. So in other words, let's take, for example, for argument's sake, the craft that was over Phoenix, that triangle that was over Phoenix in 1997. Take that as a perfect example. Everybody who saw that craft, including Governor Fife Symington, remember that James Fox and I interviewed Governor Symington on the second season of UFO Hunters. And he told us that he saw the craft. He was in awe of the craft. The craft was so close to where he was standing that he literally, if he wanted to, he could have thrown a rock and hit it. Other people have said that too. Terry Mansfield, who was actually on a level with the craft because she's up high in Paradise Valley on the edge of the hill. So that's what he said. So Bill Scott said, here's the thing. when you look at the descriptions, take these two descriptions. One came from Governor Symington, the other came from Terry Mansfield. When you take these two descriptions, they're saying really the same thing, that they could see in between the lights or among the lights at the center, they could see stars, because it was nighttime, it was 8:30. They could see stars through them, but the stars were wavy. They were shimmering. They weren't like a clear sky. It was like something was kind of interfering, some filter. Well, that filter, Bill Scott believes, could have been, on the one hand, that was a camouflage device. And right now, let's say that you wanted to build your own invisibility cloak, okay? A rudimentary, basic, primitive. So you go to Radio Shack or some other electronics store, and you buy the smallest set of video cameras you possibly can, a lot of them, right? And you build this kind of vest, this shirt, in which you attach these video cameras along your sleeves, around your neck, along your back, and you turn them on. And anybody, and then you have monitors in your front. So you're literally taking an image from behind you and broadcasting that image through your front. Now, what you're looking at then are the monitors, and the monitors are showing you what's behind you, are showing people what's behind you. So in effect, it is a very kludgy way of doing invisibility, of invisibility camouflage. I know for a fact, because I was at a meeting of this, where the CIA is spending huge amounts of money investing in companies. You think the CIA is just an intelligence gathering agency? You're wrong. They have their own venture capital group investing in companies that are dealing with invisibility. We have that capability. The Russians have that capability. Possibly the Chinese have that capability. The British have that capability. Invisibility, camouflaging, is not something that's exotic. It's something that's in use now, okay? So imagine a craft in 1997 having a rudimentary version of that camouflage. So you see lights, you see something through what is really a solid shape, but it looks like something that's not there. And then when the craft wants to take off, it simply throws a holographic image of itself traveling at like hyperspeed off into the distance, then shuts itself off. You don't know the craft is there. It's stealthy. Can't pick it up on radar. Can't see it. For all you know, the craft is not there. And Bill Scott believes that we have that capability, and that a lot of the UFOs that we claim are flying saucers, giant extraterrestrial triangles, are really Air Force test craft. Why would they fly this craft over a populated area like Phoenix, right? Actually, it didn't just fly over Phoenix. It flew all the way from Henderson, Nevada, all the way southeast to Mexico, to the state of Chihuahua. Why would they do that? Well, they want to get a public reaction to it. What's the best way to test that if you can use the UFO cover? It's a UFO. Can't do anything about it. To camouflage your own craft, fly the craft over a populated area and let everybody scream UFOs. Okay? That's one. Two, to answer your specific question, why haven't we used it in war? The answer is, why would we? We don't need it. Who do we fight? Who are we fighting when we need it? Well, we're going to use it over Iraq? For all you know, we did. Right? You don't know if this thing has been used before. You don't know if it's been used as a surveillance device. Wow, how could this technology be kept so secret? Well, because things are kept secret, okay? We are able to keep secrets. And if you punish people hard enough, I mean, look at Edward Snowden, right? Look at that plan. There were people who knew that the NSA was doing this, but we were all the nutcases. We're the ones wearing the tin hats. We're the Philip K. Dicks talking about beams coming in and out of us, that the government is surveilling everything we do. Yes, they've been surveilling everything we do since World War II. I know that. I saw one of the surveillance platforms over Area 51. We captured it on film. We were not allowed to air that episode. That was the episode that never aired. We actually captured an NSA surveillance platform over Area 51. Never aired the episode. So anyway, what I'm trying to get to is that, if we used it and it's so stealthy, how would the Iraqis know? How would the Afghans know? How would the Pakistanis know? They wouldn't. That's one. Two, why would we use it? We're fighting conventional wars against third world countries. Why would we do that? And how do you use that kind of a device against an army of insurgents so embedded in the population that you make the one wrong move and you're killing a bunch of civilians? And as scrupulous as the United States was, and I would really fight a lot of people about this, as scrupulous as we were about killing civilians, in war, the United States and the Israelis are both very, very scrupulous about this. Yes, we kill civilians, and we apologize for that, and we try to avoid it. But why would we use such a sophisticated device to fight wars like that? We wouldn't. It's a waste of time. Why wouldn't we use it in ways that people could discover it? It's the Coventry decision. Here's the Coventry decision. During World War II, you know that the British had broken the German military codes in World War II. Who was the person that broke those codes? Ian Fleming, but because he was in because he was in military intelligence and he was in special operations, oddly enough called Q Branch, hence the name Q in the James Bond novels. And so the British had broken the German codes, just like the U.S. had broken the Japanese codes before Pearl Harbor, but that's a whole other story. So we knew the German codes. Churchill knew that the Luftwaffe was planning a devastating bombing raid over Coventry, England. And his people said, get the civilians out of Coventry, evacuate Coventry. And you know what Churchill said? If I do that, the Nazis, the Wehrmacht, would know that we have broken their codes. So he sacrificed the entire city of Coventry and the population there, and the children, by the way, had gone. Remember the whole story of the children were evacuated up to the north of England? So he didn't evacuate Coventry. He sacrificed Coventry, and the Germans didn't know until near the end of the war that the British had broken their military codes.
Okay,
why would we reveal to the enemy what we know about them by using these craft? We wouldn't. It's the Coventry decision.
Right, that does make sense. And you said, why? How can they keep secrets? Well, if people refuse to believe what the evidence shows because they can't handle the truth, then keeping a secret for the government is a piece of cake. But you did mention the NSA. I do want to get into that for a moment because it has been said by, among other people, ET contactee Alex Collier, that the real forces in control of the NSA are actually malevolent grays, and specifically Orion grays. And they have bases on the moon, among other things. Alex Collier talked about how some of the NSA's technology was reverse engineered from gray alien technology. And wanted to talk about this thing about NSA having bases on the moon, because another thing about the NSA that may tie in with ETs and UFOs is Edward Snowden hasn't released this, but Alfred Weber talked about how the NSA has the ability to monitor you through your electromagnetic light emission fingerprint. Every human has a unique light fingerprint that emanates from their body, and we can't see it because it's outside visible light, but it's there, and the NSA can monitor it, and the Gwen towers are also used for this. But I'd like to know, do you know anything about the NSA surveilling people with the kind of way that I've talked about, with light scanning of humans and also having bases on the moon and being controlled by gray aliens?
Okay, well, let's start with the bases on the moon, okay? What I believe is that there were Apollo missions. They're on the books, Apollo 19 and 20, that there were Apollo missions after supposedly the last Apollo mission. I think it was 1819, the last Apollo missions. And that we did discover things on the moon we shouldn't have discovered. I don't think that they were necessarily terrestrial. I think that there have been other species that have landed on the moon, that have crashed on the moon, and I think we discovered that. And even though we had at least 2 Apollo missions that were on the books after Apollo 17, they were supposedly moved over to what became the space station. But I think they really did. I think they discovered something that was horrifying in terms of what we expected. I think we realized the moon is not really a dead asteroid-type planet. I think we discovered that. And that was why, despite all the hype, and there was a lot of NASA hype, we simply stopped going. So on the one hand, that's what I think. On the other hand, what are we going to find out from missions that other countries are going to be launching on the moon? What NASA did was set up a whole report. I think it's the report number 47. It's called Lunar Anomalies. And in this report, it cites statements made by people going all the way back to Elizabethan England. The writer Christopher Marlowe, played by Ben Affleck in the movie, going all the way back to Elizabethan England, in which Marlowe said through a telescope he saw lights circling the moon. They also cite evidence from a person called Cotton Mather. And if anybody knows the history of the United States, the Pilgrims and whatever, the Pilgrims and the history of the early Massachusetts colonies, especially the Salem witch trials, they know who Cotton Mather is. He is the fire and brimstone preacher, right? The predetermined salvation minister who was instrumental in formalizing a lot of the theology in the early New England colonies. That was Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather is cited as a source for seeing lights floating around the moon, around orbit to the moon. So Cotton Mather is an early UFO witness. All the way back in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and this is written by Governor George Winthrop, you see these fishermen north of Boston who actually see a UFO. They're abducted by a UFO. They're thrown back into their boat by the UFO to where they actually first started and have no memory of what happened. So you see this in the American colony. So for 500 years, there have been lunar anomalies that have been spotted on the moon, spotted by American colonists, by Elizabethan poets like Christopher Marlowe and playwrights, by the Germans, by the Nazis, by the British Royal Science Academy, by a writer for the New York Journal American who actually said he saw structures on the moon back in the 1940s. So this is not new information that somebody has been on the moon and there are structures on the moon, okay? Are they our structures or are they somebody else's structures? Well, we have testimony on UFO Hunters from NASA, one of the managers at NASA, Donna Hare. Donna Hare said she was actually in a photo processing lab when a stream of images came down from the moon, and NASA scientists get them ready for publication, get them ready to write. She saw that. And what happened? There was one that had a dark spot on, and it was a spaceship. She said, it looked like a spaceship. Whose was it? She didn't know, but a NASA specialist, a photo imaging specialist, was airbrushing out that image. So she asked him, "What are you doing? This is incredible." He said, "I am not allowed to release a photo that has any anomalous object on it." So you know that there are anomalous objects on the moon, things going on the moon, as opposed to our bases. The great psychic and one of the founders of the military and CIA controlled remote viewing program, the Coordinate Remote Viewing Program, CRV, actually told me, after the day after Roswell was released, he told me that he was remote viewing the moon, and when he was remote viewing it, there were creatures on the moon working in a type of factory who looked up at him. They recognized he was there as if they were able to penetrate the force. And he broke off the contact immediately because he was recognized, spotted. He was no longer stealthy in his mind. So I mean, these are stories that people have told, and I tend to believe these stories. Who was in charge of that? All the way back in 1956, when the brand new director of Army R&D, Arthur Trudeau, was looking at all of the projects that R&D was working on. One of them, this is 1956 now, was called Project Horizon, a fortified military lunar base that would hold the high ground and prevent the Soviets or the Chinese, back in the 50s it was the Soviets, from establishing fortified bases on the moon, and for looking up at any UFOs that were coming into Earth's orbit. So we already had plans for that base all the way back almost 60 years ago. Now, did that plan ever become public? Yeah, it was public. Corso put it in we put it in the back of the book Day After Roswell. We showed it to John Glenn. We showed it to the late Strom Thurmond. It's in the back of the book. Folks can read the plan. It's there. It's in print. Go buy the book. However, all the way back in the 90s, there was a British television show called Space 1999. And what was the premise of that particular television show? A moon base shooting down UFOs.
All right. I want to talk a moment about something that could start a debate here of sorts, because I remember in that one episode, I don't know if it was the USO episode, we'll get into the USOs a little later, but some guy who with a French accent told you guys about what Atlantis was, and I believe you subscribed to the idea. You talked about it, how the Bimini Road near the Bahamas was part of Atlantis. Well, however, last week I had Frank Joseph Hoff, who's an Atlantis researcher, who claims that Atlantis was actually in the area of Indonesia. Atlantis and Lemuria were basically the same thing, he says. And about 75,000 years ago, there was a great cataclysm. They relocated to like South Asia and then came back to their homeland to create the other Atlantis, which collapsed about 11,500 years ago in Indonesia. That's his claim. And I asked him straight up, oh, so you're saying all those people who say Atlantis was in the Bimini Road area of the Bahamas are wrong? And he said, yes. Well, this is obviously conflicting with some of the research that you did, and possibly some of that stuff that French guy said about Atlantis being extraterrestrial. What can you tell us about Atlantis?
Well, the French guy you're talking about is Maximilien de Lafayette, who is a researcher in anomalous subjects and a publisher. And his argument was that Atlantis was really a base, but it was a base not for extraterrestrials, but for a group he called interterrestrials. That there is a species of sapient life, very advanced sapient life, that live inside the Earth. We've heard this before. The Admiral Byrd diaries, obviously the expedition to the South Pole, Dan Robbins, Inner Earth, all these theories. Well, Maximilien de Lafayette said that, yes, that actually exists, and that was inhabited by interterrestrials. And so that was his theory. So there could have been more than one Atlantis. Plato could be talking about the Atlantis that was off Crete, that island, that was destroyed. There could have been one in the whole Bimini Road area. There could be another in Indonesia. So why be exclusive? Lemuria could have been one place. Another underwater city could have been in another place. So therefore, there really is no dispute. There could have been more than one.
There could have been more than one. I could certainly agree with that. And there are multiple timelines, many people say, so that adds credibility to the idea that there's more than one. But I want to talk about a related subject, USOs. You did an episode on USOs. There was that Autech place. They have their own website. It's like a conspiracy in plain sight of sorts. What can you tell us about USOs that you think the general public should know?
Well, on the one hand, they've been very, very witnessed. One of the earliest witnesses to a USO was Christopher Columbus in 1492. In his diary, in the ship's log, in his flagship's log, there is an entry. As they approached the Bermuda Triangle, he saw a light under the water moving along with the vessel. Then it flew up out of the water and flew away. That's in the log. That's a part of history. Now, was it made up? I wasn't on board the Santa Maria. I don't know, but Columbus authorized a notation in the official log of the voyage that he saw an underwater craft fly out of the water and go into the sky. So, hence, let's say that our history begins with that USO sighting. We spoke to people in the whole Redondo Beach, Santa Catalina Island, in Santa Monica Beach, in Santa Monica Bay, rather. And we have multiple stories of USOs all the way up toward the Malibu area, toward the Point Dume area. In fact, the sheriff of Los Angeles County told me flat out to my face when he saw a copy of UFO Magazine, he said there is much more to the story than meets the eye and more than you even know. That's what the sheriff said. We know from reports at the Lost Hills Sheriff Station that people reported seeing craft coming out of the water, right, and into the sky, USOs. We know from Kelly Johnson, the head of Skunk Works, he's looking, he said, from his home in Pacific Palisades. He had a big picture window. He's looking out over Santa Monica Bay, and he sees a craft flying that's not an aircraft, that's not a conventional aircraft. He has a Lockheed test aircraft out in the area. They spot the same thing. So this is a multiply witnessed sighting, and they know it's the same thing because the craft is doing the same maneuvers that Kelly can see, that Johnson can see, and that his pilots can see out over the Pacific. That craft design was the basis for the SR-71. So, yeah, those stories abound, and they've been so heavily witnessed. There were a group of campers on Santa Catalina Island, and another one on Coronado, out of San Diego, near the naval base there, who talked about an actual encounter with entities from one of those USOs. So, and then we went down to Autech. We went down to the Bahamas. It was Andros Island. We spoke to a lot of witnesses. A lot of those interviews never made it to the air, but a couple did, that basically said how they were seeing USOs coming out of the water off Andros Island, off that base.
Okay. I guess we'll move on. I just have some other subjects here. The show ends in about 38 minutes, so I want to try to cover a few things here. The base at Dulce, New Mexico. Just like how I said that there are malevolent Orion Gray aliens with major connections to the moon, there are other aliens that are, even though it's one whole great big alliance of malevolent aliens, there's specific groups that are in charge of specific things. The Dulce, New Mexico base is rumored to be highly under the control of malevolent reptilian aliens. They talked about that in the reptilian episode of Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura. And before they could get too close, they flooded the entrance so they couldn't get in there. But you did an episode on Dulce and Native Americans who I consider great sources of information because their legends passed down from generation to generation talked about it. What can you tell us about Dulce, and do you know of any connections with reptilian aliens in Dulce?
Well, obviously, if you talk to John Lear and John Rhodes, they will tell you flat out that that there are extraterrestrial connections at Dulce. These stories emanate from this person who was a security guard on one of the lower levels. This is what John Lear told us, and John Rhodes told us the same story, that this person named Thomas Costello was a guard. And he couldn't take what he was looking at, aliens conducting experiments on human beings, and he fled, took pictures, fled the base. His friend Ann West, he contacted her and said, look, I'm fleeing for my life here. Here is information. Here are photos. Here are stories. Here's my description. And he disappeared. Well, the Jicarilla Apache, because the Dulce base is inside the Archuleta Mesa, which is on Jicarilla Apache land. And Thomas Costello was basically given shelter before he fled by the Jicarilla Apache on their reservation. Then he fled. And the stories, and this was also told to us by Ken Storch, who was a retired police officer who investigated Dulce. You can catch his radio show. I'm not sure what network it's on, but you can catch his radio show. Ken Storch told us that he and his partner Bob, last name withheld because he's an undercover cop, drove to Dulce, and they were confronted by a tribal police officer who told them flat out, get out. And they said, okay, look, before we go, is the story of the firefight at Dulce that's been told by Paul Schneider, that was told by Benowitz, Phil Schneider rather, and Paul Benowitz, are these stories true? And the guy said, yes, but I can't talk about them, and really drove them off. So you have a lot of stories about this. Now the question is, who runs that base? Is it extraterrestrials? Is it some kind of joint command from the U.S. military and extraterrestrials? Or is it an unholy alliance with the big pharmaceutical companies? The story that we followed, first of all, Norio Hayakawa, who has been investigating Dulce for a long time, said that no, it's not extraterrestrials at all. It is a desperately awful place, but they're doing completely terrestrial experiments, yes, on human beings, but they're terrestrial. Gabe Valdez told the story. It's the late Gabe Valdez. Told the story of how he was in a police unit, and they were investigating mutilated cattle. And they came upon this disguised helicopter, this insignia-less helicopter, hovering over a cow lying on the side of the road. Obviously, the helicopter saw the police lights as they pulled up. The helicopter flew off. They investigated the mutilated cow, and they saw that the cow had a calf in its womb. It was pregnant. It was dead, but it was pregnant. They opened up the womb and literally, in a kind of like a cesarean section on a dead bovine fetus, discovered a cow's body with a human head and a human hand and human eyes. And they took that to a local veterinarian. They took photos. Folks can see the photos. Go to UFO Hunters for the Dulce episode, and you'll see the actual photos play out. And that's what's going on. So in the next episode was the Bucks County episode. And we were in Bucks County in Trenton. And Trenton's right across the Delaware River. Well, I'm talking to somebody who lives in the area. So we were at the Trenton Library. And our guest was Nancy Talbot, who was talking about crop circles. And Nancy Talbot told us straight out, you guys really uncovered something. It's not aliens. It's pharmaceutical companies. They are, on the one hand, testing for mad cow disease, but the reason, and that's a lot of the cattle mutilations because of all the experiments going on with nuclear weapons back in that area, but also, we don't know to this day how much of the American beef stock is infected with mad cow disease. And you wouldn't know. And if you have fast food chains that are taking this beef and serving it 15 years from now, you could see all kinds of sickness. Is it the spongiform illness, right? That's mad cow disease. So on the one hand, there are always experiments doing that, and they take them from various places and various herds because they're checking across a population of cattle. So that's on the one hand. But the other hand is, why the photograph? What does the photograph reveal? Well, what the photograph reveals is interspecies hybridization, humans and bovines. We know that bovine serum is used to cultivate human egg cells in vitro fertilization. That's common practice. But the other half is, can you actually grow human beings inside cows? Well, who told us he could do that? Josef Mengele, when he was fleeing from the United States, the Soviet Union, and the Israelis in the 1950s throughout South America. He was doing experiments on cloning and breeding twins among these Brazilian communities. And we know that because we see these twins turn up in these communities that are blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans. And how do they come out of these Brazilian indigenous communities? Right? It was Josef Mengele. Josef Mengele was the local doctor. He was the itinerant doctor making his rounds of the villages. Yes, he was supposedly helping patients who were sick, but he was really doing fertilization experiments. He bragged to one of his patients, and this is again, this is a Dave Emery revelation. He bragged to one of his patients that he could grow human beings in the wombs of cows. So all the way back in the 1950s, this was not new. Okay, that's what we discovered at Delsey. And if big pharmaceutical companies are behind this, just imagine if you have money, right? And we're not talking Medicare, and we're not talking the Affordable Care Act. If you have enough money and you want to grow your own heart, you take your own DNA, your own stem cells, combine them to be able to grow them in a bovine womb, and you can actually grow your own organs. Immortality is within grasp, and that's what we stepped on. And imagine its immediate use in the military. Oh, somebody has needs a new lung. Somebody needs a new this. Well, grow it in a cow. That's the other story about Delsey. Extraterrestrials on the one hand, big pharmaceutical on the other hand, or alternatively, big pharma is working with extraterrestrials because they both have, let's just say, skin in the game, albeit gray.
Okay, speaking of grays, John Lear in his Project Camelot 4-part interview from, I think it was in 2008, talked about how even though the reptilian aliens are at the top of the ladder of the malevolent alien hierarchy, the grays actually have a much bigger influence in human affairs in the sense that they directly affect humanity at a biological level, and he backed that up by talking about how the Greys are in charge of containers in underground bases where humans are stored in these containers. That kind of makes you wonder if these are the containers that Bob Lazar was referring to when he said that Grey aliens refer to humans as containers. But have you done research suggesting that Grey aliens are storing humans in containers like filled with some fluid, and if so, what are those humans used for? They are political and corporate leaders that are being genetically engineered by aliens, or are they humans that are put out into the real world to interact with us in some bad way?
Well, what John Lear told us on the show was that there were human being body parts in these huge vats, and John Rhodes said the same thing, that there were human beings in these large vats in liquid containers at Area 51 at the lowest level, that it was the Chamber of Horrors. There were human body parts. But he also said, and John Lear showed us the sketches from the Castello photographs, that there were human beings, human fetuses, not fully grown humans, but human fetuses being bred inside large test tube containers, large vials of containers that were kind of surrogate wombs at the lower levels of Area 51. Now, the question is, were these some kinds of hybrids, or were the, let's say, extraterrestrials, for argument's sake, were what they were trying to do was to grow human beings artificially, basically test tube babies, grow human beings artificially so as to either insert them into human society, or were they growing them for replacement parts for other human beings? See, we don't know that.
You don't know the answer to that question. Well,
either one or the other. I mean,
right.
The sketches are very compelling. Okay, so there could be many explanations going on at the same time. You know, it's like one of the fallacies in the UFO community is that it must be one or the other, when it really doesn't have to be. There could be many explanations going on at the same time. You could be growing human beings in test tubes for the purpose of seeing how you can grow organs and insert those organs or body parts into living human beings who are stored in who are kept in cages in another part of the facility. right? So there could be these awful kinds of surgeries going on, inserting different kinds of body parts and seeing what the resistance is to the new body parts, or using stem cells and DNA to grow entire human beings. And then, are those human beings clones, or are they literally spare parts for the people who were alive?
Good question indeed. Want to get back to something John Lear said. He also made a very radical statement, John Lear did, in his Project Camelot interview. I don't remember the source of this information. Maybe you might know. But John Lear said that every planet, it doesn't matter what kind of star the planet orbits, it doesn't matter how far away the planet is from the sun, it doesn't matter how big the planet is, every planet has its own consciousness filtering system, which allows for life to exist on it. Among other things, not only does this make the idea of aliens visiting Earth a lot more credible, because it means that life could exist everywhere because of planetary filtering system, it also, among other things, validates the work of Zecharia Sitchin. And Akashic Records editor Andrew Bartz has said Sitchin's first 3 books are very accurate. There were Anunnaki on a planet Nibiru that is in the outer solar system. And they did genetically engineer humans 480,000 years ago by combining their DNA with our DNA, Homo erectus DNA, as a slave species. Point is that the whole thing about the consciousness filtering system validating Sitchin's work, well, that's radical in and of itself. But can you not only confirm or deny this whole thing about planets having a consciousness filtering system that allows for life to exist? Have you found any research that's specific to the Anunnaki from Nibiru in your work?
Well, the only research that I can point to about the Anunnaki, and let's just take one step up the scale. Is there a cross-cultural story of otherworldly entities creating life on planet Earth? And the answer is absolutely yes. On the one hand, we know that from the story from ancient Sumer, which is what Zecharia Sitchin refers to. It's the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki means those who, and Eric von Daniken talks about it, those who came down from the heavens. Okay, so that's that story from Mesopotamia. Then you have the story in our own Bible, in our own Judeo-Christian Bible, in which, when you extract the essence of the story as a plot, an otherworldly entity, an extraterrestrial presence, creates a human being and imparts that human being specific instructions to grow and multiply. And here, you can live in this wonderful, bountiful place, but whatever you do, don't eat from that tree, because that tree is going to give you knowledge. Then another exotic species with the power of sapience, right? Consciousness, sapience, awareness, intelligence, and speech communicates with the 2 new human beings, with the woman, and says, "Well, there's a reason the other entity didn't want you to eat from this tree, because you would have the same knowledge. So go ahead, here, eat." She does. She's seduced. She's corrupted. She seduces her partner. And the extraterrestrial creature comes down and punishes them and throws them out of the garden. And then, after their children are involved in a murder, that manifests the presence of evil into this world. And the next thing you know, there's another species called the Nephilim. Did Nephilim mean giants in the earth? No, that's a mistranslation. It means those who fell from the heavens. They begin to interbreed with the human beings. That's an alien, human, hybridized species, until the otherworldly entity sees this and says, "I have to find a pure human being." By pure, he means that a person who is all human and has no alien, has no Nephilim DNA, wipes out the Nephilim in the flood, preserves the human race, preserves the animals, and that begins a whole new line of human descent. And from that design, and from that species, supposedly human beings still exist. Now, we know there was a flood, right? Because that flood is talked about in Gilgamesh. We know from geological records that at a certain point in prehistory, the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea flowed into each other. So we know there was a flood in that area. And we know from Sumerian diagrams that there was an ark, that didn't have to be one ark, there could have been many arks, where people built these circular craft to float on the waters until the waters receded. And if you've lived in L.A. and know some of the unbelievable rainstorms you get in L.A. in let's say late February through March, if you know that, it rains and rains. I mean, when we were living in L.A., it once rained for something like 25 days. The floods were unbelievable. And Los Angeles, Southern California, has much the same weather as the Middle East. And so sure, I mean, all this could be actual prehistory recorded in various poems like Gilgamesh, in the Sumerian and cuneiforms, and in our own Bible.
Right, and I know that you've made acquaintance with Giorgio Tsoukalos. There was one episode of Ancient Aliens where he led you to some depictions on some sort of a rock, I believe. And one thing about Ancient Aliens, maybe you could, I don't know if you've been watching the show, but I can't help but wonder if the show Ancient Aliens is a bit of a disinformation campaign, because while many of the historical aspects of the show in regards to when extraterrestrials intermingled with humanity are probably true, one problem I have with the show is they present religious stories as true. Well, from the research I've done, it suggests that religions are actually totally bogus. They were created by malevolent extraterrestrial forces many centuries ago in order to suppress your consciousness, because you can't attain higher consciousness if you believe that there is some higher power who you have to worship, which every religion does at some level. And I can't help but notice that the show Ancient Aliens, there were only like 2 occasions where they actually mentioned reptilian aliens. From the research I've done, they should have mentioned reptilian aliens a lot more than they did on the show. So I can't help but wonder, for those reasons, if the show Ancient Aliens is a bit of a disinformation campaign. But if you know anything about this, can you confirm or dispute anything about the show Ancient Aliens having some disinformation to it?
I don't think it does. I mean, first of all, Pat Uskert and I were, I think, the prime movers of the creation of Ancient Aliens, first of all. If you go to the first episode of UFO Hunters Season 3, what you will see is basically one segment with Giorgio in which ancient alien theory is proposed, because we did the test on that Mesoamerican little artifact that Giorgio has. We built a scale model of it, and it flew, right? And it flew, and it looked like a space shuttle. But that was the artifact. So Ancient Aliens really grew out of UFO Hunters. So let's get that out of the way first. I mean, I know the production companies that did it because I've worked for them. I was on Ancient Aliens for the first 4 seasons. So, I don't think there's any disinformation. I think what happened was, I mean, among the things that happened, first of all, History Channel is not its own entity. History Channel is owned by the Arts and Entertainment Network, A&E. A&E is owned by Capital Cities. Capital Cities is owned by the Disney company. Okay, so this is a major media corporation. This is not some independent little group. It's a major media corporation, right? There's Disney, there's Time Warner, there's NBC Universal, there's Viacom. That's media in the United States, okay? Disney is owned by, ultimately, history is owned by Disney. So there really is no need to present disinformation. I mean, there's no need to do it. One of the rationales for Ancient Aliens was that when they saw the popularity of that particular episode of UFO Hunters, and really how Giorgio presented himself, and Giorgio came back later in that season for another episode with us on Alien Contact. He was in the Greys episode along with Lloyd Pye. They saw the viability of a show based on the prehistory. So, on the one hand, I have to say that, but the way they put the show together was, remember, UFO Hunters was 3 investigators, right? 3 travelers out in the field, one of whom was scientist/engineer, one of whom was, a mountain man, Pat Eskert, who was in the Army Corps of Engineers, and I was the UFO guy, okay? And that was really, and what we did was we went to various locations where there were cases like Maury Island, like RAF Bentwaters, like Roswell, like Aurora, Texas, I can go on, and we looked for all the theories that would conventionalize the UFO stories, and we dispose of those theories one after the other. Again, it's reasoning backwards. We didn't try and prove UFOs were real ever. The series that preceded UFO Hunters, and I was on that for 4 years, was UFO Files. And UFO Files and Ancient Aliens, except for the intellectual content, are basically the same shows from a point of view of structure. You present the theory, you present the experts for that theory, you present whatever graphical evidence you can for that theory, and you come to your conclusions and then counter those conclusions with debunker arguments and then say, well, it needs more investigation. That's the outline of UFO Files. That's the outline of Ancient Aliens, okay? So that's the structure of those shows. UFO Hunters is very different.
Right. One thing I want to finish up on this note. There's a little bit of a debate in regards to what humans are, in regards to how we get involved with extraterrestrials. Some say that humans, we are viewed as cattle by malevolent extraterrestrials like the Greys and the Reptilians, and there are benevolent extraterrestrials like on alien councils and guardian angels who are watching over us to protect us in the event that these malevolent ET forces get too powerful. They step in to protect us. Other people say that humans are neutral pawns in a battle between these malevolent ET races and the benevolent ET races, and that is the way you should look at it. I guess both point of views are, it's really a point of view issue, but based on the research you've done, can you say, we're like cattle to malevolent aliens and we're being protected by good aliens, or no, we're pawns in a battle between good and evil extraterrestrials? Which side would you take?
I think there are many different UFO species, many different extraterrestrial species. There are all kinds of life forms, okay? And we know that even on planet Earth, there are silicon-based life forms that defy reality. So I think there are many. I think that there are some that are more advanced than human beings on planet Earth, and some that are less advanced than human beings on planet Earth. And I think that our own genesis of our arrival on planet Earth is one of the reasons for why there's such a big UFO cover-up. So I tend to think that human beings are kind of like a neutral species, that maybe we were fabricated, we were interbred, and keep being interbred by an alien culture for the purpose of hybridizing human beings to a new culture. We know that human beings evolve. And we know that evolution is speeding up. And is that the result of alien hybridization? It could well be if you look at what human beings do scientifically to the creatures that they are working with. I mean, look at the whole thing with fruit flies and mayflies and things like that, and plants. We hybridize species. We hybridize species to jump evolutionary stages. We hybridize species like salmon, frankenfish, for the purpose of creating certain kinds of species that are resistant to certain kinds of things. Now, we've been doing this for 100 years. This is not new. And if we can do it to the species for whom or above whom we are the stewards, there's no reason why other sapient species, extraterrestrial species, could be doing that with us. So I think on the one hand, we're kind of neutral. On the other hand, if there is an alien culture that's hybridizing us, that's growing us, that's changing our DNA, if that's happening, for all we know, there could be another species that doesn't want that to happen, because they want planet Earth for themselves, but nobody wants to do kind of like a Battle LA business, right, where flying saucers come and they're zapping us with Z-rays and all kinds of nuclear weapons. Why destroy a planet you want to inhabit? If I were a very advanced extraterrestrial culture and I wanted to take a planet over, I would do it with my DNA. I would do it with viruses. I would do it with a whole bunch of things that would leave the planet intact, but evolve the species to accept us. And that's what I think is happening.
Okay. By the way, we got 8 minutes left. Might as well talk about crop circles for a little bit, because ET contactee George Kavaslis in my interview with him talked about how it's a percentage factor with crop circles. Some are created by extraterrestrials, some are created by the consciousness of planet Earth, some are created by secret government military technology. But the majority of them, he says, are created by extraterrestrial entities who are trying to guide humanity in a particular direction, and that all has to do with the fact that every crop circle has a certain design to it. That design affects you at a subconscious metaphysical level and affects Mother Earth at a level too. And either benevolent or malevolent extraterrestrials will put some sort of a crop circle design with a good or bad intention to subconsciously lead us in a certain direction. Now, it is said that UFOs, the evidence suggests UFOs, they are using UFOs to do this. And it's funny how this one video shows UFOs making a crop circle. But the funny thing is they found out that the guy who shot that video actually has experience in tampering around with film and video footage and altering video footage. Now most people are saying, no, that's just a strange coincidence that a guy who has skills in manipulating film filmed that video. Don't be suspicious. That's just a strange coincidence there. But in regards to UFOs creating crop circles, what can you say, and can you authenticate that video that I'm specifically talking about? Is it a genuine video?
I cannot authenticate it. I know the video you're talking about. Yeah. And I know that I've seen other video with things that look like orbs, right? Glowing orbs hovering over a field, and then there is a crop circle there the next day. The thing that fascinates me most about crop circles, in addition to the designs, but it's not just the designs, which is why I think that crop circles are more like messages than anything else, and not messages to us, because if they were messages to us, we would certainly be able to interpret them. Like, why would you speak to another species in a language, or why would you go to a country like, let's say, Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan or Kyrgyzstan, and you go to that country and you only speak English, right? And they can't understand you, and you can't understand them. What's the point, right? When the early missionaries came to North America, they encountered Native they encountered Native Americans, right? Indigenous peoples, and this is in the 15th century and 16th century. And what they did was they sent missionaries from the Catholic Church to develop these vocabularies, these glossaries, kind of like these Rosetta Stones, so that the missionaries could communicate with the indigenous peoples, and hence we were able. So that's what we did. So I think that the messages impressed in the crop circles are messages for other extraterrestrials. Maybe they are directions. Maybe they are landing spots. Maybe they are mathematical. Maybe these entities speak in mathematical forms. We know that mathematics is a universal language, right? Doesn't matter what species. Doesn't matter what planet you're from. Why do we think that it's a universal language of math? Because the one constant in any species, planets are round, right? Flying saucers are round. Circles are a basic shape in the universe, from our sun to Alpha Centauri to the planets that we've discovered to the planets in our own solar system. If you have a circle, there is a relationship between the diameter of a circle and its circumference, right? Pi is a constant in the known universe, a constant. So therefore, there is a mathematical basis for communicating with every other life form through the symbology of mathematics. An advanced life form may take that to a much higher level, hence the designs in crop circles. What we know about the designs in real crop circles is that there is a mathematical relationship among the various points in that circle. So we know there is a language of mathematics, and we can basically define that language. We can basically understand that language. Even if we don't know what it means, we can understand that there is a language of mathematics in the crop circles. That's A. B, we know that in real crop circles, the level of magnetite in the shoots of the grain that are flattened by the crop circle is powerful. So there's a magnetic field in the circle. How do we know there's a magnetic field in the circle? Not just by analyzing the magnetite in the shoots of grain, we know that, but what we know is that animals that rely on magnetic processing to travel, what animals rely on magnetic processing to travel? Birds. Birds don't just go by the light. Birds go by magnetic fields. What do birds do when they encounter a crop circle? They don't fly over it. They fly around it because the magnetic field affects their navigation senses. So we know there's something in the circle that's going from the circle into the air, into the atmosphere, high enough so that birds fly around it. Those are just three things actually, that define a crop circle from the kind of made-up crop circle that Doug and Dave were doing, okay? So then the question is why? Well, since there are these aspects to a crop circle that are so unique, I expect that this is more of a communications device, more of a sign device, go left, go right, what this place means, where you are. Think of it as a signpost on a map, right, where you are on this planet by this particular crop circle in relation to something else.
Right. That's a good way of looking at it. And like I said, it is a percentage factor. So the fact that there are different ways that crop circles are made does factor into it a lot. But, Bill, I guess we might as well let this show come to an end. It was a pleasure having you on. You're a very knowledgeable man, not just in UFOs, but ETs as well. But with that being said, I'm going to tell you the same thing that I tell all my guests. I try to get as much information out on the show as possible. That's why it's called Nature of Reality Radio. But in the process, I try to get as many different people on as possible before giving any one specific guest double dips. So with that being said, as much as I admire your work, don't expect a call from me in the near future to come on my show, because there are a lot of other fascinating individuals on planet Earth who I need to give some glory on my show, and I plan to try to get as many people on as possible to make it as fair as possible. But still, I loved having you on, and I do hope your research continues to go far.
Great. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
My pleasure having you on. All right. Take care, Bill. That was great talking to you. Later.
Bye.
Bye. Well, folks, that was one of the most informative interviews I've done in a while, I think. Well, all my interviews are informative in some way, try to get information out. But in regards to next week, we will be having Andrew Bashago on, government whistleblower in time travel and space travel, specifically to Mars technology and stuff. So we'll be having him on talking about that. Briefly touched on that earlier in this talk when I talked about Obama going to Mars and Area 51 with time travel technology. So tune in next week to listen to all sorts of stuff in regards to time travel and space travel technology. And by the way, interesting note, there's actually a strange astrological alignment. I shouldn't say strange, it's unique, called the Cardinal Grand Cross, April 23rd and 24th of April 2014. Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn, major transformations, all systems, politics, government, corporations, leaders, and lifestyles. Major changes in volatility are associated with Libra being in Mars, including justice, truth, transparency, relationships, and marriage, fighting for a cause, explosions. Jupiter in Cancer, major expansions out ahead and into heart, service, humanitarian, emotional intelligence, heart is home, and Aries and Uranus, Uranus and Aries. Major quantum shifts, societal freedom, rebellion, revolutions, awakened visions, conscious desires, unity, and our I am diversity. That's the astrological significance going on right now. Make of that whatever you will. I actually don't do personal horoscopes. I believe in letting the stars guide me rather than looking to the stars for guidance and just living my life to the fullest. But, folks, make of that whatever you will. These next 2 days should be very significant with these 4 planets in their certain positions. But with that being said, Namaste. Hope you learned something from this. Tune in next week for Andrew Bashaga. Namaste, everybody.